Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Today I got a super fun and super exciting episode for you guys today because it's one that you asked me to make, so I figured why the hell not. We're going to be comparing MiSTer FPGA's Turbo Core up against Analogue 3D's Unleashed mode, letting them absolutely run as fast as they possibly can to see the results between the two. Because one of the best things about both MiSTer FPGA and Analogue 3D is you don't have to run N64 games at the molasses slow dumpster fire frame rate they released at. And I get it, I have nostalgia for N64 as well, but it is one of those things I absolutely still think that some games are nigh unplayable when you go back to original hardware or original hardware speeds. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But starting off at the top, we're taking a look at Perfect Dark, and first on Analogue 3D, you'll see the little symbol in the bottom left hand corner, and now we moved over to MiSTer FPGA. And just so everyone is clear on the settings, the Turbo Core on MiSTer FPGA has no settings, it just runs faster, and on Analogue 3D we have different options for overclocks, and I've pinned it all the way to the right to Unleash mode. And I will say, Analogue 3D has some secret sauce here in Perfect Dark. I'm not sure if Analogue is doing some coding in the background or not, but I would probably say you get about 5 or 10 frames per second more here, depending on what's going on screen at once. Now, I will leave you with a caveat that these games absolutely are different playthroughs. Nothing is going to happen the exact same way twice when you play any level in Perfect Dark, so it is one of those things. Sometimes in logic, there might just be something more going on in one version of the game other than the other one. But I would say on average, I'm seeing 5 to 10 frames per second improvement on Analogue 3D in certain scenes. Be leave me a comment down below and you tell me what you think so far. But of course, the best way to tell is to go to a side-by-side comparison. You're going to see here we have Analogue 3D on the left and the MiSTer FPGA Turbo Core on the right. This is definitely faster, even though there are a few extra enemies on screen in certain instances in both sample. I'd really love to know what Analogue 3D is doing when it comes to the actual overclocking mode in Perfect Dark, because this one exhibits a better frame rate than MiSTer FPGA is going to accomplish, but honestly it is the outlier case of how the hell did they get an extra 5 to 10 frames per second out of it. I would be curious, I don't have an answer for you, it is just an observable difference. Both are absolutely awesome, but honestly Analogue 3D just a bit faster. But trust me, if you actually go back to original N64 hardware, this is captured off a real cartridge on an Ultra HDMI modded N64. The frame rate absolutely just isn't something that I can play anymore. I want MiSTer FPGA Turbo mode, I want something like Analogue 3D. I just need those extra frames of animation. Is it worth picking up an Analogue 3D just for a couple extra frames in Perfect Dark? That is totally up to you. You have to answer that question yourself, but it is one scenario in which I have noticed that the game definitely in spots runs a little bit faster. So here is your first test for the video. Is this MiSTer FPGA Turbo Core or is this Analogue 3D Unleashed mode? It's going to be very hard to tell, but there are a few clues in every single bit of video capture. Not that I've left, but just little indications in the video quality or otherwise that should tell you if you watch closely which one is going to be which. But let's move over to Beetle Adventure Racing, another game on original hardware that absolutely just does not persist in any sort of good frame rate. We're starting off here on the actual track sequence on Analogue 3D, and I will tell you again, even though you have the logos, when we switch different feeds, just don't look at those logos too closely. I feel like people get fixated on them and actually miss the overall content. So starting off with the Analogue 3D source with obviously the highest overclock possible, this game definitely sees a lot more frames than a stock N64. But this is one example when I talk about the Perfect Dark secret sauce. This game doesn't seem to run any faster than MiSTer FPGA's Turbo Core would run it. Now unfortunately Analogue 3D does not have a frame counter built into the operating system, at least as the recording of this video, so it isn't something I can directly compare with a numerical value. We just have to go on feels and vibes here. So watch the motion cadence of the screen, watch how it moves around, and we're going to jump over very quickly to MiSTer FPGA. And honestly, these things, if I didn't tell you which source they were and I didn't logo them up, I honestly think it would be near impossible for you to be able to tell which one is which, because they seem to have the exact same frame rate, at least in my opinion. And that is the thing, Perfect Dark is a very confusing test because somehow it just seems to do ever so slightly better, where everything else I'm testing so far seems to be at par, one source being basically the same as the other. But again, the best way to tell you exactly what's going on is going to be a side-by-side test. Again, we have Analogue 3D on the left and we have MiSTer FPGA on the right. And you'll see here as we start moving through the cores, everything seems to animate at about the same speed. Everything seems to have the same fluidity. A good thing to pay attention to is going to be the trees at the borders of the screen, because things that are further to the edge appear to move faster in 3D racing games, or basically even in real life. That's kind of how it works. So pay attention to those as the trees come by in both instances here. And again, for me, it does seem to be 1-to-1 par. I'm sure one source is getting 1 frame per second more or 1 frame per second less here and there, but it is so incredibly close that honestly, I just kind of think these things are the same. So as far as Beetle Adventure Racing is concerned, a game that's absolutely incredible, but definitely needs a lot more performance. If you put them side by side, MiSTer FPGA Turbo versus Analogue 3D Unleashed, you're getting in essence the same performance, and that's going to be pretty par for the course for the rest of the tests. Perfect Dark is why I started the video off, to show you guys the differences, but now we're going to be talking about the very similar things. So let's jump over to Banjo-Tooie, a game that I really do feel like on original hardware or original clock speeds can be a little slow and boggy in spots. We're starting off here on Analogue 3D and we'll move over to MiSTer FPGA, and this is one instance where I feel like at least in the splash introduction here and a couple cutscenes, the turbo core of MiSTer FPGA seems to be averaging a few extra frames per second. As Gruntilda's face fades in there and kind of comes from the bottom to the top, it just kind of feels a little bit more smooth and fluid to me. This is one example where I will show you a frame counter for just a bit on the MiSTer FPGA side of things, because this is a video that I made about a year ago when the last update to the turbo core came in. But in the open world environments, in the locked off cut sequences here, I would say that 99% of the time these two sources are doing the exact same thing. It's just every once in a while, to my eye, MiSTer FPGA's turbo core gets a couple extra frames per second and feels a little bit more fluid, especially when you have some big sweeping camera pans, because fast camera movements are a place in which your eye will be able to visually tell the difference in fluidity. Now, just so you know, if you're not watching this at 60 frames per second on YouTube, go ahead and make sure you are, because none of the tests I'm talking about are going to be coming across on screen if for some reason YouTube defaults to 30 frame per second mode. So if you're on a cell phone or even on a desktop or television, just make sure that is in fact the case, because if not, none of this is going to be appearing for you. It's one of those things I wish I could force YouTube to show everything in 60 frames per second. I just can't. Now, as we're in the open world area here on MiSTer FPGA, again, way more fluid than original hardware, but not something that's going to be a persistent 60 frames per second. Basically, none of the games in overclocking mode on Analogue 3D or on turbo mode in MiSTer FPGA are ever going to be able to hit a lock 60. They are a hell of an improvement over real hardware, but just don't think to yourself that you're going to be able to get a persistent 60 frames per second out of something like Banjo-Tooie on either platform. If you want that, you want to go over to emulation and start using enhancements, because you can definitely lock it to 60 there. But as far as this open world area is concerned, definitely an improvement on the MiSTer FPGA side of things. And just if you were curious, here is the frame counter from this area. You're going to see it kind of hovers between the very high 20 frames per second all the way up to 60, just depending on what's on camera. And that is going to always affect something like the frame rate, how much the hardware is actually drawing to the screen at once. Now moving over to the Analogue 3D source, again, don't have a good frame counter here, so something I can't show you dataset wise. It does feel exactly the same in my opinion. All of the movements are fluid, all of the camera pans are fluid. Being in this open area here, maybe Analogue 3D actually dips the frame rate like 1 or 2 frames less here going up the hill, but honestly, the cadence and pacing still seem to be about the same. It's when we go inside for the locked off cut sequence where the turbo core again seems to have a little bit better performance compared to what we're seeing at Analogue 3D, but it is very borderline. So again, pay attention here as we kind of come up these stairs. As the camera moves up, it has slightly less of a staccato movement, especially here when you're seeing the king and the camera starts going to that Dutch angle. Will you tell me down below in the comments how you feel about this one? And again, you can see the frame counter on the MiSTer FPGA side of things. We're at like 40 to 45 frames per second, depending on what we're looking at, all the way up to 60 here when not much is going on, and it definitely just feels like it could be ever so slightly more fluid. So here's your second test of the video. Is this source here from Analogue 3D on the highest overclock mode, or is this from MiSTer FPGA on the turbo mode? And just like the perfect dark example, you'll be able to tell if you pay attention to some of the hallmark image quality differences between MiSTer FPGA and Analogue 3D. But I'm just still super impressed that they were able to get quasi-reflections on the floor on N64 in the first place. Maybe one of the best visual tricks the console ever. But let's move over to a game that didn't actually come out on the retail library. This is Portal 64, and it basically is a complete remake of Portal from Valve, except on the N64 hardware. We're taking a look here at the MiSTer FPGA core, then we'll be moving over to Analogue 3D. This is an example of where sometimes overclocking does absolutely nothing to the performance of a game. Portal 64 on MiSTer FPGA's turbo core and Portal 64 on Analogue 3D Unleash mode absolutely seem identical to me. There is no detectable difference whatsoever as far as the speed is concerned, but it is a good example of the difference in the deinterlacing algorithms, at least as recording of this video. Now I hope at some point in time Analogue updates 3D with some more deinterlacing options, because Weave in general just really not my favorite look whatsoever, and it's pretty much consensus that that is definitely the inferior version of deinterlacing. It's not the worst thing in the world, it just is again a noticeable difference that you should be able to see here in the footage. But you do have to remember that YouTube is going to compress this thing when I upload it, and trust me, they're going to step on it pretty damn heavily even if I upload it at 4K with file exports in the 25 to 40 gigabyte range depending on the motion on screen. That is an unfortunate reality of doing this. You're not seeing what I'm seeing in my studio when I'm editing these things, but you can get a very close approximation. I feel like the deinterlacing differences will definitely come across in the compression, even though they might be a little bit more subtle than I see. But again, I want you to get the idea of overclocking is not some sort of silver bullet that is going to improve everything. Some games, even with unlocked frame rates, seem to do exactly the same thing, and many of the games on N64 lock their frame rates because the game's logic is actually tied to the refresh rate. So if you try to load something like Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask up, you're not really going to be able to get anything out of the overclock because it's just not the way it works. You have to have an uncapped frame rate on any N64 game if you want to see performance improvements by using overclock. It's one of those things. It's just basically like a governor on a car. If there's one on there, you're not driving over 65, and if there is a frame rate lock on something on N64, you're never going to go above that frame rate no matter how much overclock you throw at it. It's just one of those things that trips a few people up, and I've seen in the comments, why doesn't overclock speed up X game? That is because it is just an impossibility as to how the code actually works. And a complete aside, if somehow you've never played Portal 64 before, I can't stress enough just how incredible this game is as a tech demo. And even though the maker could never finish it because of Valve stepping in and saying they'd rather him not do that, it is still something absolutely worth checking out. Now again, over on Analogue 3D, if you pay attention to all of the footage cadence here, it is imperceivable which source is which, outside of the fact that the deinterlacing is different. So if it gave you a screenshot of these, you would think they were 100% the same, and if Analogue 3D had the same deinterlacing algorithms that MiSTer FPGA did, then you would think the footage was the same as well in motion. But that really is the one fundamental difference, deinterlacing. Outside of the performance, these things are straight up 100% the same to my eye. Now let's move over to one more example of a game that absolutely needs overclocking in some way, shape, or form to be playable on N64 in my opinion. And I totally get it, Gauntlet has a Dreamcast version, and I would definitely recommend that over either of the Analogue 3D or the MiSTer FPGA Turbo modes on N64, but we're comparing performance here and not which version of the game would be best. And I would say on Gauntlet, it's definitely a situation where Analogue 3D seems to be getting another like 3 to 4, maybe even 5 frames per second. So basically the takeaway here is Perfect Dark has more performance than MiSTer FPGA. Banjo-Tooie seems to want to perform better on MiSTer FPGA than Analogue 3D. Most games are going to be par, and every once in a while something like Gauntlet Legends can throw a couple extra frames up as well. Now I know I could have compared other games, and maybe I will after the holiday, but just so you know if you don't, my wife and I are going to be very shortly moving to a brand new place where I'm going to have a much larger space for the studio and game room for videos. So while you watch this, the Analogue 3D is back in its box, taped up for that move. It's just a hard time for me right now. I've got a metric crap ton of stuff going on in my normal working life as well as on YouTube, as well as basically trying to pack an entire house up and move it. I'm trying to do all that while not missing a single day on YouTube, so wish me the best of luck. I'm basically trying to do this entire thing on on about as hard of a hard mode as possible. So if there was a couple of games you want to see tested in this video, I basically just ran out of time and kind of picked the examples I like the best. Because here on MiSTer FPGA Turbo, when you get this entire horde surrounding you, you can definitely see that the frame rate is going to dip just because it is drawing a lot to the screen and handling a lot of stuff at once. When we move back to the exact same place on Analogue 3D, there might be a few less enemies on screen here right now, and that is down to random chance, but I would say still you're probably getting like 5 frames per second more here, although when I did hack into them, it was a situation where I killed a few, and that will definitely bring the frame rate up, because there is a lot going on in Gauntlet Legends at once. So again, sometimes one core can run faster than the other, and the other core can run faster than the actual other core, just down to the fact of what's going on screen. That is a variable I can't control, unfortunately. So again, all of these tests, they are basically subjective as to what you like better, but in Analogue's instance, you're definitely getting more frames per second here out of something like Gauntlet Legends. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think of the comparison so far. I would be curious. It really isn't a this one wins and this one loses scenario. Both do an incredible job of actually overclocking N64 and making a lot of games more playable. Analogue 3D takes the lead in a few examples. MiSTer FPGA can also take the lead in a few examples. So basically, if this was something like a title fight, both people got knocked out and both people won at the same time. But honestly, that is a good thing for N64 fans. It means whichever version you want to use, MiSTer FPGA or Analogue 3D, you're just going to get better performance out of N64 games, and trust me, some of them absolutely badly need it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, but we're done. I'll see you guys next time. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye-bye.